end of the day, 10 hours in the studio, you'd listen back to like.
Hello, this is Alvin Rowe. Today I'm with Alex and George from the music duo Able Noise. Today we're gonna talk about your album High Tide and music experimentation. On stage, your main instrumentation is baritone guitar and drums. And when I saw you perform live at Rewire 2021, I think it's more or less the same performance that is also online. In those occasions, you also had a ghost member, like a tape player, a Walkman actually. Is it a Walkman? And I was wondering, is that like integral part of your live set? And is it also included in the composition in a way? Is it like also an instrument that you use when you're recording or writing music? Using
tape started out of sort of like necessity, that we were just two people with just these instruments, and we wanted this extra sound to come in, we wanted this extra track, so then just tape was the way to just bring that in. And then that really became a sort of, kind of like a ghost band member. So we could also use as an instrument, like as a way of like manipulating sound, working with sound. So we really always think in terms, like we have our instruments, but we also really have tape, and we still use, we use that to our advantage in different ways.
It was kind of the one way of using recorded material very evidently. My brother did composition, and I went to a lot of concerts, and I really struggled also always with there being like an ensemble of 5 musicians plus a backing track that someone like played on the laptop, which sounded super crisp. So then it just was like, so why were those players not on stage, or why is anyone on stage? It kind of created this. So with tape, it's always been this thing of she's playing guitar, he's playing the drums, and the tape player is playing that extra sound, like really, really evident. And also with how it gets manipulated and stuff, it's a very, very physical representation of sound, of it being like this is pre-recorded music, and then how that can be. It's also just the physical element of it. It's like the most, maybe like LPs, like a record player as well. It's like the only way I know that is like so physically, where you can actually bend the sound of pre-recorded music so kind of physically on stage.
When recording the album and with the post-production, there are tracks that are not what you're gonna physically perform live, where you're already like imagining what you would gonna put on the tape, or were you thinking about like the live translation at all in that moment?
Not at all.
I think it's a good thing that we didn't think about that before, because then I think the result would have maybe been different, or it would have been more complicated to really only think in the form of recorded music. But it was a really funny thing that afterwards the moment that we got out of our shells and started thinking about performing live again, that was just like hit us, or at least hit me like a truck of like, oh, how are we going to do this?
The gig is the gig, and there's music that works in that context really, really specifically, also between the two of us, sonically, and our interests, and then recorded music being a completely different medium to experience. So it just doesn't make sense to try and, to me, generally, it doesn't make sense to kind of assume those two are the same thing and treat it the same way, and then write and perform music the same way. It's like the difference between theatre and cinema. It doesn't make sense that a theatre piece would be translated into film and vice versa. It's two very different things. So with the album, we thought of that really, really consciously. Okay, so what does this piece need? How can we like take it that bit further? How can we bend it to kind of really, really work in this context?
Yeah, but I think we do have like the excitement to keep, some ideas and some parts that were written for the album. I think that we did already know that we want to take that with us, or at least to figure out, like this is, newly written music, and how could we don't have to, but how could we translate that to live? Which is not, and like knowing like it doesn't work, like we cannot just play it the same way, because it doesn't work that way. In the same way that the stuff that we've performed live, if you record that and put that on an album, it doesn't work at all.
Then it was going back to like, okay, so the gig, so how can we play live? And then it was a question of like, okay, what could we use which has been written in that context? So when working on the album, we weren't thinking of the gig. When it came to writing gig stuff, which is now, it was, okay, what bits would be interesting to kind of keep? But there's a lot which is just different, and I find that quite exciting. There's a lot of live stuff which we've been playing even for like some years, which has never been recorded or released, and vice versa. On the first album and the second album, there's stuff which we've never even thought of playing live, because it's just physically impossible and just not interesting. Just
Why not interesting?
for example, there's this one on this album now on High Tide, the second track, which is this kind of really noisy guitar-y droney thing. It's guitar and saxophone, and apart from the practicalities of it, like we could both play the guitar parts and then have the saxophone on like tape, but it's not it, because it's like, I find it like a very kind of psychedelic, kind of druggy, really intense, like super hot, the sun on your head, like really like intense thing. And just that mood, that experience, I think, doesn't make sense for us to even try and recreate in the context of live or whatever. It just works in that, like being stuck in traffic in the car going, oh, but like live, we're building a different kind of mood.
Sometimes your music can be quite deceiving because of this tape manipulation. And like if I listen to a piece, there is a lot of like time slowing down or going maybe a little bit backward, and it feels like you're playing with a sample in a way, like you recorded it and then stretched it or edited the recording. But then when you play live, you also do these sort of things, like you slow down, then get faster, and or strum while tuning the guitar, for instance, which is in the end a very similar effect if you're just listening, I think. I was wondering if there is an intention to also sound a bit mechanical in a way, when you're performing live.
To Pieces is also an interesting one because we've been playing it for years and it's gone through. There was a phase that we were playing it and we never figured it out. We never finished the ending, and we were playing it for years, and every single time we played it, we were like, we want to play it because we like it, but it's not done. And it was this really painful. So To Pieces is an interesting one. For example, how that works on the album is the fact that it's like referencing rock music in a sense. That although, you know, I like the riff, I like it as a track, it is also this thing of like, okay, so now we're playing rock music, and what does it mean? Why would we suddenly be playing rock music? And so it is this tape manipulation thing, other than like sonically we were both very excited by the result, it just kind of trying to contextualize us using like a motif, which is like the rock thing, which makes a lot of sense recorded, because it is this thing of, so here's a rock song messed with, and then live, although the live version existed right way before, I think was the same thing, kind of stemming from this thing like, okay, it's a rock song, but why would we play this like druggy rock song? Like, okay, what is our intention with it? It's like, oh, okay, maybe if we kind of like enhance this physical feeling of it, not like we have another song which isn't, oh no, it is. Yeah, I was gonna say it's on the first album, To Consume, and that's like a pop thing. It's like this kind of poppy rocky thing, and it got contextualized by making it sound horrible through tape, as if you're listening to it like off the radio, for then only at the end of the piece us to actually sing on it with our clear voices, for it to hopefully kind of give the impression of it having been on the radio and us messing with the radio, and then we're singing to the radio playing. So it's always this kind of thing of also how you contextualize it on album in that way, but also live, how you play it to kind of suggest, not that we're like afraid of playing pop music or rock music, but just contextualizing it within the context of, you know, experimentation and highlighting elements within it. That is not just this cool riff, but it is the reference of.
I didn't want to get here, but you mentioned that you want to sort of reference rock riffs or pop music. Do you think you play post-rock music?
It's not that we want to reference rock music, it's just that we are rock people. I'm rock. I come from rock. So it's there. I mean, it's like I do genuinely like these bits, but it just is this kind of step further of, okay, but what? This is art school crap. This is stuff we learned from art school. Like, but why this? Like, why this piece of music? Why this rock thing right now, in this year? How is this kind of relevant? So it's just kind of being aware of the reference. It's not wanting to reference. It's just writing music. It's writing a riff which, you know, we like. But then it is trying to contextualize that. Okay, so what is this riff? And that's where the kind of thoughts come.
Yeah, and then completely taking it apart and then zooming in on every little detail and seeing how that works and why is that there and why do we move it this way.
What is interesting for me about your music is that is very abstract in a way, but also really depending on the dynamic of you two playing together. And like also what you just said, like the way your structures or patterns are like a bit fragmented sometimes, or most of the times maybe. And like it feels like the tempo is just based on the interaction of the two of you, and so I feel like you never play with a click probably, but when recording, do you also record live together, like guitar and drums at the same time?
I think on the album most stuff we've done there has been really separate. I think it works in such a collagey way that it's not, you know, written first as one piece and this is how it goes and then we just need to record it. It's like this thing is first here, let's record it. Okay, what can this instrument add? What can this instrument add? And then we build that sort of puzzle kind of together.
Yeah, it's not like a track that is played from beginning to
No. It was really annoying actually because we were doing a lot of recording. We had 2 full-on recording sessions with Sotiris, the sound technician. And both of them were, okay, we need a little bit of this sound, we need a bit of that sound, maybe a little bit of bass, maybe a little bit of drum feedback, maybe a little bit of voice, maybe all these elements for us to then like process and edit into a music. At the end of the day, 10 hours in the studio, you'd listen back to like, and just to conclude like, okay, I think we can work with this. So there's nothing that you're like, oh, this fucking rocks, man, this is like so cool. It's like, okay, I think this 12 minutes of feedback we can work with, kind of thing.
I don't know, but like lately I just really compare it to cooking. It's like, okay, we had like a little bit of garlic, we threw like a little like pile of cayenne pepper there and like a bit of like broken bread there, and you know, and okay, we have all these like weird ingredients, some match, some don't. Okay, let's see what we can cook with this. Like, yeah, really in that way. And then the thing that I think I really like with the way that we have gone about it, it being super fragmented, is that I can still really take pieces apart. Like it never becomes one solid track that only exists in that form. That there's still a drum riff that Alex does, or like a riff that I have, or a vocal melody that we can pick from that and then move it somewhere else, or put it in a different form in live performance. Yeah.
When you're going to the studio, when you have the album in mind, do you have like the entire composition of a track? Even if you play it in different bits, do you have in mind like what's gonna be there, or do you record like some samples and then you use them as elements to compose a song?
That one.
Yeah, no, yeah, we have everything thought out, written out.
No, we have very vague ideas.
No, I mean like in the way of like, okay,
she has it.
I have it. Like I know where I'm starting, I know where I'm going, I know then it's there and this, but I think we do leave out certain gaps or kind of create that there's still some freedom to experiment, that there's still some freedom to move. Also just depending on how it goes live and how it sounds in the space.
But are you talking live or album now?
Sorry, no, I'm talking live.
Oh.
Yeah.
Rewind.
Album-wise, it is, what we did is we had ideas. Oh, maybe this could be interesting. So we had like a riff, or we had a melody, or we had a concept, and then we went into the studio and we recorded the riff, or we recorded ideas, sounds to feed this idea, and then went to the laptop with the material and tried to make sense of it. That's how the album went. So maybe it was a bit of jamming, maybe it was a bit of improvising, maybe it was like some melodies we had. A lot of it was very conceptual, like, oh, it would be interesting if we constructed a piece. Like the third piece on the album, Providence, was really that, like, oh, it'd be really cool if we maybe did this. And then we recorded it, we're terrified of the material for months, left it on our hard drive for months, And then that was the last thing we worked on, like, okay, we have to face this now. And then listen to it like, oh, actually, this is kind of cool. And then...
I mean, it's like super long as well, so you didn't cut that part, right? It's the one that is like...
Yeah, it's quite long. We did cut a lot.
Okay.
That one was actually meticulously, this bit, that bit, that bit, that bit, as well as we could so that it doesn't sound cut, but it's heavily cut.
And then what you were saying is about live. So live, you do have a structure in mind, but you also have some room for improvisation.
Yeah, like depending on where we're playing, how big the room is, what kind of context it is, who else is playing, that we make something much bigger or much smaller. And for example, when it comes to feedback, I also really like it that we have certain limitations set, that we know this is kind of how it's set up, this is kind of the sound that we're doing, but it just depends on what's gonna come to you live, and then we play with it. And then we've played together for so long that we, I think, have really learned how to read each other, that I can really tell when Alex wants to rev it up or take it down, or if he's into it or if he's not into it, and vice versa.
Tonight you're gonna perform at this event series called Default. It's an event series for contemporary experimental music and sound art performances, and I was curious, what are your plans for the show tonight?
We're doing something completely different. We're doing a sort of one-off performance, which is actually based off of a technique that we used for the album, which was miking up the drums, miking up the kick, the snare, high tom, floor tom, and creating feedback from them. Alex is sort of controlling them, playing with it with his drumsticks, and I am just giving the signals and I'm moving between them. So for the album we did it quite extensively, that I could fade between, I think, like 6 channels almost, and really just like blend and move over them and like play the drums as a melodic instrument almost.
So it's just microphone feedback through the speaker, but resonating at the frequency of the drum. So you can actually like tune the drum to the note that you want, and it resonates how that. And then it's kind of really meticulous mic placement to get the specific frequency you want. But no, it sounds like a sine wave. It sounds like a synth or whatever. But it's really cool because you can play it by pushing it, tuning it, or muting specific parts of the skin to get other frequencies out. Or if you drum on it, of course, that kind of resonates. Nothing.
All right, I've got the last question. This could be 10 seconds or 10 minutes, that's up to you. Do you think experimental music can be political, or in general, do you think avant-garde experimental music is political per se, in a way?
That is a 10-minute question.
That's a 10-minute one.
Yes, I really relate to the Dadaist notion of, which is not that experimental music, but Dada was this kind of original thing of needing to be rid of the logic which brought us to the First World War, like ridding ourselves of the mindset which we are in, which leads to kind of these political manifestations, atrocious political manifestations. I think the biggest tragedy with experimental music is the fact that a lot of spaces are closing, which has always been the case. Because with alternative music and experimental music, you have alternative spaces and experimental spaces, and due to having alternative spaces, you have alternative dialogues and contexts and safe havens for people to meet and discuss ideas. It's not tailored to like one individual, and with this one individual, one kind of like political or social mindset. When you have alternative spaces and experimental spaces for art and for music, you have social hubs where people can interact. Having like an experimental music environment, you give space to other forms of thought and discussions, which is very, very important. Questioning the status quo constantly is really, really important, which is also aesthetic. By default, it's very, very aesthetic. Questioning the mainstream aesthetic is by default political because it kind of shows that there are alternatives. It isn't this kind of one-way approach. And then, yeah, I mean, I guess a big question is how political can, for example, instrumental music be? I think that's kind of a big debate. And there's many examples of how, because you of course can do it lyrically, you can of course do it through, there's this one guy, Marshall Trammell, amazing free jazz drummer. He's got his own sound, his own technique, and he's extremely political. Like whenever he does a concert, he combines it with a lecture or with a talk. He does a lot of kind of like social events, educational events, or kind of like workshops with people. And for him, music is a means to, translate these ideas. And it's like, it's two different things. It's like, okay, now I'm going to play a 20-minute solo. But before and after it is him also contextualizing what this is. Like, he's also got this kind of very, very, his drumming to him, he's interpreted very, very specifically in how it stems from a history of violence in his family, from, the poverty that his family and his environment grew up in, and how that has influenced how he plays. So then you are told this, and then you watch him play, it freaks the hell out of you, and then you discuss it afterwards. So in that sense, yeah, I think it is very, very, very possible. It's not by default. I think also historically, academically, a lot of music is kind of really for music's sake, which is also fine. Yeah. But I do think it has the potential of being very, very political. But you just need to be very conscious with how you...
Yeah. Well, I think what you mentioned about after World War II, there were a lot of composers of avant-garde, the first experimental music composers who were intentionally also just saying it's not possible to write a poem after World War II, whatever. So they were making very noisy, very strange music, which was also just a reaction to a melody, because they were saying a melody now doesn't make sense as art in a way. It's not meaningful, and so for them escaping that form or that type of sound was inherently already political in a way.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean.
And I also know that the reason I ask this question is because sometimes it happens a lot with free jazz, very experimental free jazz bands that are also a bit noisy. Sometimes there is a saxophone solo or trumpet solo that sounds very like someone shouting, yelling, and it feels political to me. But why? That's the.
I mean, it's just witnessing anger also. I mean, just being angry at society, being angry at politics. Personally, I just think I stand behind the logic that everything's political. Of how we shop, how we dress, how we speak to each other, how we treat our partners. Everything's completely political. It's representative of political influence, and also of political consciousness. So how we set up and the equipment that we use and the volume we play at is political, it's environmental, it's all there. And it might be in many cases it's unconscious, but a lot of it also is kind of very, very conscious of how do you speak to your public. For the longest time, George and I just don't speak through microphones when we're addressing the public, which is not a political manifestation, but it does have political implications. This is a shared endeavor. Trying to break the wall of us playing the music, but not being the ones on stage. We are the ones playing the music, but this is a group effort.
Of course, it's a completely different kind of gathering where you're playing. If you're playing here in the basement with people around, it's completely different than being at a Taylor Swift